A very good morning, students. I hope you all are well at your place. Students, in English class today we will begin with the first flight book, which consists of prose and poetry. In prose, we have already done one chapter, A Letter to God, and two poems, Dust of Snow and Fire and Ice. So today we will begin with the second chapter. The name of the chapter is Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom. Before starting the chapter, let me give you the introduction of it. Long Walk to Freedom. This is the name of the autobiography of Nelson Mandela. This chapter is an extract from the autobiography of Nelson Mandela, born on 18th July 1918, who was the first black president of South Africa. Excerpts, which means extract, from Long Walk to Freedom include description of the inauguration ceremony, citations from his speech, his journey to being a freedom fighter, and the struggle, along with a tribute to other freedom fighters and countless other people who fought for their freedom. In South Africa, a brutal practice named apartheid was followed. Apartheid refers to the discrimination between people on the basis of their race. It was one of the most brutal practices in the society where dark-skinned people were deprived of their basic rights. This lesson gives us an overview as to how Nelson Mandela, along with others, carved their way to a society where there will be no discrimination on the basis of their color, caste, race, age, or gender. Nelson Mandela was South Africa's most important leader and one of the greatest statesmen who served as president from 1994 to 1999. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993 for ending racial segregation, apartheid in South Africa peacefully, after about 50 years of white supremacy, and for laying the foundation for democracy. Nelson Mandela studied law at the University of Fort Hare, which expelled him on 1940 for leading a student demonstration at university. Nelson Mandela was arrested for the second time in 1962 for leaving the country without being authorized for organizing demonstrations. He was convicted to 5 years in jail and penal servitude. Nelson Mandela involved in the trial for plotting to overturn the government forcibly. He was convicted to life imprisonment on 12th June 1964 and detained in a high security prison in Robber Island off the coast of Cape Town. Throughout the 27 years Mandela spent in prison, his fame increased steadily. His silent suffering contributed to rising pressure on South African government and apartheid, making him an international symbol of resistance and a martyr of the fight against racism. Mandela was moved to Poolsmoor High Security Prison in 1982 and hospitalized in 1988. Back to prison, his detention conditions were made easier, though he always refused any political compromises in exchange for freedom. At that time, South Africa was isolated for being racist, and Frederick William de Klerk, the country's last white president gave up to the international pressure for clemency. Now, when Nelson Mandela came back to the public life on 11th February 1990 at the age of 72, he became a free man again. His only aim was ending what he started 40 years before, dedicating himself to black people emancipation. After suspending the party's armed wing, Mandela became President of African National Congress in 1991. At that point, a historic meeting with de Klerk led the two leaders realize that only a compromise between white and black people would prevent a civil war in South Africa. In late 1991, the Convention for a Democratic South Africa was established. It was aimed of creating a new government elected by all citizens. Mandela's and de Klerk's efforts convinced the Nobel Committee to award the Nobel Peace Prize to both of them in 1993 for their work for the peaceful termination of the apartheid regime and for laying the foundations for a new democratic South Africa. Now, the end of apartheid and Mandela's presidency, South Africa held its first democratic election on 27th April 1994. The African National Congress won with 62% of votes and Mandela became president. De Klerk's party, which gained 20% of votes, was anyway included in the first national unity government. During his presidency, Mandela worked on peace and to boost the country's economy. He favored forgiveness to vengeance and demonstrated by creating the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1995. Even those who committed abuse and violence during the apartheid regime were cleared. Nelson Mandela quit his political and public life in 1999, leaving it to Vice President Thabo Mbeki the task of continuing his path. Mandela passed away in Johannesburg on 5th December 2013. So this was the introduction of the chapter. Now let us move forward to the hard words with their meaning. The first hard word is deputy. That means second in command. The second is sworn. That means given under oath, determined to stay in the role specified. Third is obligations. That is a duty or a commitment. Fourth is abided. Meaning is obeyed. Fifth is maize. That is a maize plant. Sixth is transitory. The meaning is not permanent. Now the next is emancipation. That means the fact or process of being set free from legal, social or political restrictions. Now eighth word is liberate. That means free or to release. Ninth is discrimination. That means being treated differently or unfavorably, means not treated equally. Now the last and the 10th is deprivation. That means the damaging lack of material benefits considered to be basic necessities in a society. Now let us move towards the detailed summary of the chapter. I will discuss this point-wise as it is given in the chapter. The first one is first non-racial government. It was the 10th of May 1994. The day was bright and clear. The inauguration ceremony of the first non-racial government was held at the lovely amphitheatre in the Union Buildings in Pretoria. It was the largest gathering of international leaders on South African soil. Politicians and dignitaries from more than 140 countries attended the ceremony. First of all, Mr. De Klerk was sworn in as second deputy president. Then Thabo Mbeki sworn in as the first deputy president. Then came Mandela's turn. He was sworn in as the first black president of South Africa. Now the second point is Mandela's speech. Mandela spoke about how for decades South Africa was the seat of white supremacy. Now the presence of all people confer glory and hope to newborn liberty. The blacks who were considered as outlaws not so long ago were hosting the nations of the world on their soil. Their victory over apartheid was a common victory for justice, peace, and human dignity. Political freedom had been won. Now they would work hard to liberate all their people from the bondage of poverty, deprivation, and diseases. Never would South Africa again face the oppression of one by another. Now, the third is impressive display of jets. Then there was a spectacular display of jets. South African jets and helicopters rode in perfect formation over them in the sky. It was also a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy and to the new government. Then two national anthems were played. Now let us come to the fourth point, that is the sense of history. In this point, Nelson Mandela was overwhelmed with a sense of history. A few years after the Anglo-Boer War, apartheid was introduced in Africa. The society based on racial discrimination was the harshest and the most inhuman society in the world. Now a new system based on the equality of all the men regardless of their color, race has replaced the old and cruel system. Now the fifth one is the policy of apartheid. It created a deep and lasting wound in the people. The decades of exploitation and oppression of the black produced heroes like Tambos, Sisless, and others. These black heroes were men of extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity. The greatest wealth of South Africa was not in its minerals and diamonds, but in men of such great character. Now let's move towards the sixth point, that is the struggle of comrades. Nelson Mandela learned the meaning of courage from such brave comrades. Courage is the victory over fear. These comrades were ready to risk and sacrifice their lives for an idea, the idea of freedom and equality. Even in the darkest prisons, their hopes and faith were not broken. They never allowed the flame of struggle to be extinguished. Now the seventh point is twin responsibilities. Nelson Mandela thought that every man has twin obligation. He has a duty towards his wife, children, and an obligation to his country and people. In South Africa, it was impossible for blacks like him to fulfill both those obligations. If any black tried to live like a free human being, he was punished and isolated. He was forced to live an isolated life away from his family. He was forced to live a life of rebellion. The next is the last point, 8th, joining the African National Congress. Mandela realized that not only was he deprived of freedom, but his brother and sisters were also deprived of freedom. That was why he joined the African National Congress. It was his desire for the freedom of his people and their self-respect that totally transformed him from a weak young man to a bold one. A law-abiding lawyer was forced to become an outlaw. He realized that freedom is indivisible. He knew the oppressed must be liberated. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. Both of them must be liberated. So this was the detailed summary of the chapter. Now let us see the main theme of the story. The lesson pays tribute to those black heroes and patriots who waged a relentless struggle against the apartheid or the racist regime of South Africa. Here we find a description of the inauguration ceremony held in the Union Building, attended by politicians and dignitaries from more than 140 countries. Nelson Mandela gives a message of peace and unity of mankind. He foresees a new regime which will be based on the equality of men and women. He hopes that in the new regime there will be no exploitation of man by man. There will be no room for racialism and segregation in the new order. So I hope, children, you all have understood the chapter. A worksheet will be provided to you. So based on what we have studied in the chapter 2, Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom, try to complete that worksheet. Thank you, students.